So we're going to come to our next speaker now, and I want to introduce you to Arron Hutchinson, and I'm going to pin him instead of me and take mine off. Remove pin, there you go. And Arron's from the ADHD Foundation, and you're all right with sharing, Arron?
But yeah, hi everyone, my name's Arron. I work for the ADHD Foundation. If you've not heard of us, we're a charity based in Liverpool. We offer like a whole lifespan service. So we work with children in schools and young people in secondary schools. We do training for teachers, and we do some like adult coaching, adult therapy for individuals who not just have ADHD, but across the umbrella of neurodiversity. I've left kind of our social media handles and all of that sort of stuff on there. Another thing that I've done is I've left my email address. I've accidentally typed in my personal email address rather than my work one, but that's absolutely fine. Don't worry. Please feel free to email me. The reason being is that, unfortunately, I'm not able to make the Q&A at the end, but if you do have any questions and you want to get in touch, please feel free to reach out. And as I say, I'm not bothered that that's my personal email address. I've just put the wrong one in. There's very ADHD start to this, I think, this morning for me. But yeah, so in terms of my role at the foundation, what I do is I do a lot of staff training, and I also go into schools and work from kind of a therapeutic angle with children and young people who are neurodiverse, kind of helping them with their well-being and emotional regulation. But also what we do offer, which we're really proud of, is we work with children whether they've got a diagnosis or not. So we kind of, it doesn't matter that, they might be on a waiting list, they might not be on a waiting list at all, the parents might not want to get them, but they're clearly presenting with some difficulties, and we don't have to wait for that diagnosis to help them. Okay, next slide. Thanks. And just to say as well, my background, I probably should have started with this. My background is in teaching. So I was a primary teacher for about 5 years before I ended up working for the foundation. I found out that I had ADHD this year. So the whole time I was a primary school teacher, I didn't know I had ADHD. I mean, I've always known my entire life that I just kind of thought a little bit differently, and I just kind of processed things differently. I kind of saw the world in a slightly different way, and I've always kind of felt that. I've always felt very different, and to be frank, a lot of the time, and I don't see it this way now, I always felt there's something wrong with me. I'm not like everyone else. Why can't I just be like everyone else? And obviously, since finding out that it's ADHD, I don't see it that way at all anymore. I just see it as a difference. But obviously, for so many reasons, I really struggled in teaching. I found it really, really difficult. Now, I'm not one to kind of blow my own trumpet, but I know I was a really good teacher. And I had lots of positive traits that the kids that I taught really, really benefited from. However, for day-to-day organisation, all of that sort of stuff, I really, really struggled, and I found it really, really hard. I found it incredibly hard. I'm going to kind of go into that in a second, but what I want to do is just start with the positives, because we kind of try and take a strength-based approach. This has kind of been mentioned in a couple of the kind of what people have been saying so far, is that actually it's not just all about the negatives. There's loads of positive traits, and if you are a teacher with ADHD, which I know a lot of you are from the comments this morning, just have a look at these. These are, now obviously these are a bit of a generalization, and everyone presents differently. We're not all going to present with these, but these are general positives that are often associated with ADHD. So quick thinking, being really quick on your feet, being spontaneous, energetic, really passionate and enthusiastic, especially if it's like a particular hyper focus of yours, something you're really, really interested in. Great at problem solving, creative thinking, kind of seeing the big picture and being able to be really insightful and solve that problem. Now, I would look at those and I think they are all absolutely things that make a fantastic teacher. Being able to be quick on your feet and adapt things and change things if you need to makes you a fantastic teacher. Being able to be spontaneous and think, okay, right, let's do this, makes you a great teacher. Obviously, energy and enthusiasm are real key strengths of teachers, and being really passionate about your subject or whatever it is that you're doing or teaching. Problem solving, you've got issues in the class, and you're trying to, you see the bigger picture, maybe helping children to kind of see things a different way. These are all really, really good traits of teachers. But it's not always kind of that obvious to people, and it's not always out there. And if there's that fear, isn't there, of, and I know we're all kind of in different positions, but if you told your head teacher you've got ADHD, for example, they might look at you the way that I looked at myself all those years ago, which is that there's something wrong, when actually we should be looking at it this way. Next slide, please. Okay, so now obviously they're the positives, but there are not loads, sorry, I shouldn't have said that, but there are some considerable kind of impairments that are going to get in the way, and we're going to need support with when it comes to teaching. So one thing I want to talk about is executive functions. So if you've done training on ADHD before, you've read a bit about ADHD, you've probably heard about executive functions. It's not just exclusively about ADHD. Executive functioning difficulties are associated with many neurodiversities. Sorry, I think I've left animations on this one. If you can just press twice for me. There we go. Thanks. So they have executive functions. There's generally considered, you see different interpretations. 8 of them I'm going to talk about today. They are housed in this part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex. And they have 2 major components. The first one is organization. So the ability to organize your thoughts, as well as organize, physically organize your materials, gather what's needed, all of that sort of stuff. The second function, the second component, is inhibition. And that's your ability to regulate your emotions, your impulses, and your attention. Now, these can be severely impaired in people with ADHD. Not everyone with ADHD has executive functioning difficulties, but a huge majority of people with ADHD do. The reason for that is they're housed in this prefrontal cortex here. Now, lots of studies have shown that this part of the brain actually takes longer to develop. There's a delayed development in the prefrontal cortex in an ADHD brain. So it's no wonder that lots of people with ADHD have some difficulties with these executive functions. So what I'm going to do now, if you don't mind just going to the next slide, is I'm going to go through, that was quite a smooth way of doing that, wasn't it, the way I did that then? I was impressed with myself. Yeah, I've probably ruined it by then talking about it, but yeah, I was just so impressed with myself. So we've got these 8 executive functions here. I'm going to kind of go through them quickly, talk about what they might look like, how they are what they're like in practice. And then I want you to think about, and you're probably already doing it, how much of this is needed in teaching, and how much does school demand of you to do these things. So the first one is impulse control. So that's thinking before you speak, thinking before you act. So this can be, thanks, Simon. This can be kind of a kind of social difficulty with ADHD, being really impulsive, maybe interrupting people when they're talking. So it could be colleagues, it could be students, but this can be something that's really, really difficult for those with ADHD. Not everyone who has ADHD is impulsive, of course, but if you are, it can be a real strong difficulty. Another one is emotional control. So the ability to keep your feelings in check. So to kind of park how you feel, put it to one side, and then return to it later, and deal with it when it's more appropriate. Now, lots of people with ADHD can really struggle with this emotional control. And obviously the demands that teaching, whether you're neurodiverse or neurotypical, teaching is a really difficult job. In my opinion, it's the best job in the world, and I still miss it for lots of reasons, but it is difficult, and you're under so much pressure, there's so much going on. So if you've got a kind of impaired ability to control your emotions and regulate your emotions, you're going to feel it even worse when that pressure does ramp up. Flexible thinking, so being able to adapt to unexpected changes. So obviously, that happens all the time in school. You need to adapt, you need to change. And working memory. So Working memory is essentially, it's a type of short-term memory. So it's basically, the difference between short-term memory and working memory is short-term memory is you find out a piece of information, it's stored in your short-term memory temporarily, you decide whether it's going to be relevant to you or not, and you either let it go or you store it into your long-term memory. Working memory is slightly different. You store something in your short-term memory while kind of doing something with it. So the best example I can give is if you are writing an email, and someone phones you halfway through the email, you answer the phone call and you chat. You've not got written down anywhere what it was that you were going to write in that email. It's just all stored in your head. Someone phones you, you take the phone call. While you're talking to this person, you've got to keep that information for your email stored in your working memory. When you put that phone call down, then if you can access that information and get straight back on with the email, you've probably got quite a good working memory. Lots of people with ADHD really, really struggle with their working memory. Now, if we think about that in a context of teaching and the context of school, how many times have you got to store something temporarily in your mind and there's 1,000,001 other things going on before you can then return and get it into a list or write it down or whatever? So if you've got difficulties with working memory, that can kind of be a barrier in teaching. Self-monitoring is kind of being self-aware of how you're doing, and that can be how well you're doing or how you're doing against a time limit or a clock. I know for me, when my self-awareness it's got better as I've got older. When I was teaching, my self-awareness was awful in terms of my biggest problem was that I would just keep talking all the time. Ironically, probably the worst thing I could have done for the ADHD students in my class, because they're struggling with their working memory, their attentional regulation, and the longer I talk, the less kind of information that it is going to kind of be able to remember it and keep it in their working memory. I think a lot of it came for me from an anxiety about, I just wanted them to know everything and include everything, so I just keep talking and talking and talking, and you'd see the kids there with their pencils on the paper, like waiting to go and waiting for me to stop talking. But actually, it probably would have been better for me to just kind of step back and give them the key information. But because I kind of struggled with that self-awareness, that self-monitoring, it was only kind of after the event when I'd reflect on it and go, oh, actually, maybe I should have not spoken for so long. And then just going to quickly go through the others. So we've got planning, prioritizing, organization, and then task initiation, just getting started. Now, all of these things, I'm sure you can see, for lots of people might be considered skills that a teacher needs, and we do need these to some extent. We do have to be able to organize to an extent. We do have to be able to plan and prioritize to an extent, but does that have to be the kind of the same way as everyone else? Absolutely not. I don't think that, there's one way of being organized. There's one way of being on top of things. There's one way of, setting out your plans and stuff like that. But we think about it in schools, and I'm not sure about the schools that you're in, but I think they're getting better now, but probably still a long way off. It's very much one way, isn't it? So this is the planning template that we all use. This is how we plan our lessons. So we're all going to follow this, and that we know that doesn't work for everyone. So now with these can obviously be difficulties for teachers with ADHD, but if we think about those strengths as well, I think those strengths make you a fantastic teacher with ADHD. Going to kind of come back to these towards the end as well, but I just wanted to kind of think about maybe why, and because I know when I was a teacher and with undiagnosed ADHD, I had this real low self-esteem. Thought I was a terrible teacher, thought I was rubbish because I couldn't do these things that I thought everybody else could. But actually now looking at it through the lens of ADHD, I think, no, I wasn't a bad teacher. I had all of those positive traits. I just needed a little bit of support and just to do these things in a slightly different way. Next slide, please. Not as smooth as the last one. Another thing I want to talk about quickly is just talk about the kind of emotional regulation. So I mentioned that before. It is an executive function, emotional control. but it can be severely impaired with ADHD. Real difficulties managing your emotions. It's linked to impulsivity. It's also linked to those executive functions. So if we think about this, you've probably seen this before from this book, The Chimp Paradox. If you've not, basically, our brain is split into different sections. I'm going to talk about two of them today. I'm going to talk about the frontal part here and the limbic system in the middle. So this is something I use with the kids that I work with, actually. So essentially, the front part of the brain there is where those executive functions are housed, and our limbic system in the middle, that's a really emotional part of our brain. So I say to the kids, it's like having a little chimp in your head. It's really emotional, it's really reactive, it's primal fight, flight, freeze response. So when we feel those high feelings of anxiety and stress, that's the part of our brain that we're operating from. One of the other functions of the prefrontal cortex is that it actually keeps that chimp in check, is what I say to the kids. It calms it down, it keeps it under control. Now, as I've mentioned before, this can be, the prefrontal cortex can have a delayed development in those with ADHD. And if that's the part of the brain that helps calm the emotional part of our brain down, it's no wonder that those with ADHD can be perceived to be more emotional than others, and react more emotionally to situations. I use this example with the kids. So we say we get our fist like this. Our thumb here is the limbic system, so that's your chimp brain there, and then these four fingers sit nicely over the top, and that's your prefrontal cortex. And what that does is it calms this chimp down, it keeps it under control. But sometimes when we sense danger, when we feel that stress, we flip our lid. So that means the prefrontal cortex effectively stops working, and we're operating from this emotional part of our brain. So we're not able to think rationally, we're not able to organize our thoughts, because they're all executive functions that are housed up here. And that's not working effectively right now. And it's about trying to calm that down to sit back nicely over the top. If you did, one thing I would say is that if you're ever with a child using that example, just be careful. I did this with a lad, it was only a couple of days ago, who had a very kind of literal interpretation of language. And I could see the panic on his face when I did it with him. And I said, I was like, what's the matter? And he was like, is that not going to do my brain some damage if it keeps opening and closing all the time? And then I had to explain that it was just a metaphor. And then I had to explain what a metaphor was. And then that went on for a very long time. But it is a really nice example. But then think about it, how many times are we going to be feeling that stress response in teaching? And if you've got ADHD and you might struggle to control that chimp a little bit more, you're going to be feeling those big, strong emotions quite often. Next slide, please. Okay. Just also wanted to do a little bit of a case study here. So I just wanted to talk about a child from the school, an individual from the school that I taught at, and because I want to talk a little bit about masking. Now, this person was hiding in the toilets on this particular day, crying their eyes out at break time. They were unable to cope with the demands of school, those executive functioning difficulties, rejection sensitive dysphoria, which I'm going to come on to in a second, and emotional dysregulation, everything that I've mentioned so far. And it all kind of came to a head. Now, when we go on to the next slide and we see what others kind of, I thought that was a good one then. If you don't mind, on the next slide for me, don't worry. This is what other people thought of that person, that they always told them they were really happy, they were really positive, they were organized, and they were really on top of things. Now, why was that? Well, that's because this person was masking. They were hiding their true self. They were hiding how they felt, the way they were, and they wanted to put on this front and this idea for I'm just like everybody else. I'm not weird, I'm not different, I'm just like everybody else. So next slide, thank you. And then if you don't mind just clicking it again, because I think there's an animation on this one. Thank you. So that individual, it wasn't actually a child in the school, it was me. And the reason I chose this picture is that I look absolutely terrible on it, because you can see the bags under my eyes. I remember getting called to get the school picture taken to go on the website, and I'd just been crying in the toilets like 10 minutes before that. Now, I remember it all kind of came to a head for me on this particular day, is that I just had a complete breakdown. I was really, really struggling, really, really finding life as a teacher really difficult, partly because I didn't understand why I was the way I was. Had I known I had ADHD, I may have been able to flip that narrative in my head and think about it in a more positive way. But I didn't know, I didn't understand. And I was also subconsciously masking. I was also hiding who I really was to just try and be like everyone else and put this kind of perception of me out there, that I'm really organized, I'm really on top of things, I'm never late for anything, and this and that. And I actually became those things, but I had to work incredibly hard to get there, and it was absolutely exhausting. Now, I remember this particular day that I mentioned. I went back into my classroom, my year 6 classroom, after break time, and I was, puffy-eyed and everything. And I sat at my desk, about to start the next lesson, and this little girl from my class walked over and started patting me on the back and saying, "Oh, everything's going to be okay." And she didn't know what was wrong with me. She just kind of saw me in need. And at that point, I thought, "Oh, something needs to change here. I need to kind of do something, because they're not here to look after me. It should be the other way around." And then I kind of started to look inward then, and that kind of led me down this journey to where I am now. But masking is something that I go through personally. I'd be interested to kind of hear, because there's really limited research out there on masking with ADHD. Really, there's a fair and there's some information about masking with autism. There is some with ADHD, but there's not loads, and it's something that I'm really interested in. I would be interested to hear, maybe in the chat box or anything like that, if anyone is a teacher with ADHD. Do you feel like you mask? Do you feel like you hide your condition? And just let me know whether that's the case for you, because I'm just really interested to know kind of how many people do it. Next slide, thank you. Okay, I mentioned there rejection sensitive dysphoria. Now this is it's just gone on to the one before. Don't worry, this the one before. Thanks. I mentioned there rejection sensitive dysphoria. Now this is something that lots of people with ADHD can struggle with, and other neurodiversities as well. Now essentially it's a real strong feeling about rejection, and this kind of idea that you feel like everyone is going to reject you all the time, feeling like it's you against the world sometimes, and there's no, and if I try this, that fear of failure, if I try this, I'm going to be rejected and it's going to hurt. Now, the first time I spoke about this in a school, one of the teachers said to me, she said, "Well, no one likes this can't be a thing. Nobody likes being rejected." And of course, that's true. No one, whether you've got ADHD, whether you're neurotypical, whatever, no one likes being rejected. It hurts for everyone. But the best way I've heard it described, I saw this on Twitter. I can't remember the person it was who said it. I wish I could take credit for it myself, but I can't. But if anyone asks you, just say that I told them. I told you. But I've heard RSD described as emotional sunburn. So essentially, if you think about this, if someone smacks you on the back, it's going to hurt, isn't it? If you're sunburned, it's going to hurt even more. So RSD, the idea is this emotional sunburn. So rejection hurts, it hurts everyone. But if you've got RSD, you've got that emotional sunburn, it's going to hurt you even more. And I think that's a really good way of looking at it. And it kind of combats that idea of, oh, well, no one likes that. Well, yeah, of course they don't. But if you're struggling with this, you're going to feel it even worse. And actually, according to Attitude, 99% of teenagers and adults with ADHD identify with this. And 1 in 3 say it's the hardest part of living with ADHD. It is for me. It's the absolute hardest part of my ADHD. I've been told my whole life that I think the world's against me, and that's kind of, I've just developed this idea of people are going to reject me anyway, so I'm going to preempt it, and I'm not going to put myself out there. I'm going to stop myself from doing things, and it kind of develops this internal monologue. You develop this fear of failure and this low self-confidence, this low self-esteem. But then when we look at this through the lens of teaching, how exposed are you as a teacher to rejection? Every single minute of every single day, you're performing all day, aren't you, to a group of children and young people or adults or whatever age it is that you're teaching. You are putting a version of yourself out there all day, and that can be really, really exposing and really, really vulnerable, and you are opening yourself up to rejection. So if you're someone who identifies with this RSD, that can obviously be a real difficulty with teaching, because the opportunity and the potential for rejection is really, really high compared to a lot of jobs. It's kind of always there, and this can be a real difficulty. But thinking about the positives and what we can do, what I wanted to do is just kind of talk to you about some of what I would give as like just personal tips, personal advice. Middle child, oh Sarah, thanks, because I'm a middle child and I get told that all the time, and I still get told that today, that I've just got middle child syndrome, and I just send my mum articles on this all the time. So yeah, but I'm so glad you said that. But yeah, if you go to the next slide for me, Lynn, thank you. Oh yes, you're the oldest child, yeah. So support strategies. Okay, this is just my personal advice, as in from my experience, maybe what I wish someone would have told me all those years ago when I was teaching. The first thing is be kind to yourself, and I know that's easier said than done. I really do, but just as a reminder, please be kind to yourself. Don't let that internal monologue, that internal dialogue of, I just need to try harder, I'm not good enough, all of that sort of stuff, really try and think about that in a slightly different way. One strategy that I use with the children that I work with, and it works for adults too, is every time you say something negative about yourself, every time you've got that kind of that inner dialogue of I'm not good enough, imagine saying that to, think of like your closest, most kindest friend that you've got. Imagine saying that to them. What would they say to you back? And we can, with the kids I work with, so there's a lad who, he's got his best friend James is lovely, and he's so nice to him all the time, and he's always kind of helping him. And he's got written on this little piece of card, he's got written, what would James say? And every time he's kind of talking, he's like talking himself down, he gets the card out and looks at it, and it kind of helps to regulate and bring himself back. But we can do this as adults as well. Think about that. What would X say? What would Y say? But be kind to yourself, I would say. To-do lists. I just wanted to mention this because I'm a massive list person. When we think about all that organization, prioritizing, all of that sort of stuff, to-do lists were essential for me as a teacher, and they might not work for everyone, but they were essential for me, because what it enabled me to do was, once I'd put something down in a list, my anxiety reduced slightly, because I wasn't worried about forgetting it, because it's okay, it's there, it's out of the way. However, lists can be overwhelming for some people as well, especially in teaching, because it's an infinite list, isn't it? You're never going to get to the bottom of that to-do list. What I would recommend, if you're finding that, is maybe there's some great to-do list apps that kind of do this in a bit more of a friendly way. There's one called, not a very creative name, but it is a good app. There's one called Lists to Do, and I use that every day. The thing that I really like about that is that you can set different lists for different days. So I have a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday list. And I also have a desirables list. So what I put on the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday list, I put in there the things that I absolutely have to do. So from teaching, it would be, if I needed to plan a lesson, I'd put it in there. If I need, mark the books, whatever it was, the things that you can't really do your job without doing. Everything else, all the other stuff that you get told to do. Oh, remember, I want you to do this report. I want you to do this. I want you to do that. And all of those other things that get added on your to-do list, stick them in your desirables list, because what that helps you to do is you're prioritizing them. You're thinking, okay, I know these need to be, these need to be done. But actually, these things are more important, because as I mentioned before, executive functioning, prioritizing can be difficult, but it actually really, really helps, because you're just separating things, and it just reduces that anxiety. I know I've only got, am I over time now? 5 minutes. Okay. Another thing that's good about some of the apps is what you can do is, what I found with to-do lists in school was that I would get to the end of the day and I'd have done like 10 things, tick them off, but there'd still be like 12 things left on the list, and I'd have to cross them out every single day and then write them in the next day's list. And that really, over time, over the 5 years, really kind of impacted my self-esteem, because I was feeling like a failure at the end of each day. I haven't done this, I haven't done this, I haven't done this. And the physical action of doing that every single day really didn't do me any good at all. I just couldn't see it at the time. It's only looking back now that I realized. What's good about the apps and using technology is that, especially with this list to do app that I mentioned, you can actually just move the items from one list to another. and then they're gone, they're out the way, and you get a little tick when you've completed everything in your list. So if I had 10 things in my list and I'd done 6 of them, at the end of the day, I'd just move those 4 to tomorrow's list, and then I get a little tick saying I got 6 out of 6, and you get that little dopamine hit, which lots of us with ADHD need. You get that little dopamine hit, that sense of accomplishment, rather than having to cross everything out. Another thing that I'd say is, rather than, I should say as well, there's loads of other great software and apps and things to help you organize out there. That's just my personal experience and what I use, and I can see some people putting some recommendations in the chat, which is great as well. What I would say as well is the kind of reasonable adjustments, the support strategies we give to kids, use them for yourself as well. And this can be really, really hard. And I have to tell myself to do this. The amount of times I go to schools and I tell teachers, give these kids with ADHD, give them regular movement breaks, chunk up their learning into smaller manageable steps. And I will sit there for 8 hours at a computer, not following that advice and getting really frustrated and getting nothing done. But allow yourself those movement breaks and don't be down on yourself when you do. If you need them, that's absolutely fine. It's much better to have 10 minutes of work, 10 minutes break, 10 minutes of work, 10 minutes of break, than an hour's work trying to force yourself to sit there when actually, are you actually going to be productive in that hour? Much better. Get up, move around, come back, regulate your attention, you'll be better. Another thing is and this isn't easy, and it's kind of ironic me saying it, because this is something that I didn't do when I was a teacher, but I would really recommend talking to your colleagues about it and being open about it. And I know this is hard, and I know, who am I to say that, because I didn't do that myself. But looking back, I think it would have made a massive difference to me. And I've actually spoken to ex-colleagues of mine now, from who I'm still in touch with, got on really well with at the school I worked at. And when I've told them, you know, I've got ADHD, this is why I maybe struggled with this, they said everything just makes sense. That's why you reacted like that to this, and maybe that's why this happened, and that's why X happened, and that's why you got really stressed about this. I can see that now. And that's why you were really good at teaching this particular lesson or this particular strategy and all of that sort of stuff. But it makes sense. And again, you know, obviously you will gauge whether you feel that that's going to work well for you or not. The other thing as well is talking to managers. Is, you know, I don't necessarily consider it a disability, as was mentioned this morning about autism as well, but it is officially, you know, protected under the Equality Act. So, you know, if you do need reasonable adjustments in your workplace, whether that's a school or not, there's a legal obligation to provide that for you. It's there. So, you know, not that we'd want to always go down the legal route, but don't be afraid of opening up, because you do have protection and there is things there to protect you. Relaxation and meditation techniques as well can be really helpful, but making time for it in the evening, and also making time for your hobbies and interests, and don't lose yourself, because this is what I did when I was teaching. I completely lost who I was, and I lost my sense of identity, and my whole identity just became a primary school teacher, which is great, and I absolutely loved being a teacher. But actually, everything else that I like to do, play music and play football, all of that sort of stuff, I completely lost it all. And I didn't do it for 5 years. And I feel like I've been kind of, since finding out I've got ADHD and allowing myself that, I feel like I've been like reborn again, and I've lost like that big chunk of my life. But make time for it, schedule it in and commit to it, because you are never going to get to the bottom of that to-do list. It's never going to happen. There's always something else in teaching. There's always something to think about. So it's about getting there and knowing when you've done enough, and think, I have worked my absolute hardest. I have done enough here. I'm switching off the laptop for tonight, and I'm going to go and play football, or I'm going to go on a run. I'm going to bake a cake. Whatever it is that you enjoy doing, make time for it and schedule it in. And lastly, just to finish off, celebrate neurodiversity. Don't think of it through this negative idea, which is great while we're on this, like, you know, a conference today that's all about this. Remember the positives, remember all those success stories of people with ADHD and other neurodiversities. Talk about it with the kids in your class. Be open about the fact that you've got ADHD if you feel it's appropriate, because what you're going to do then is really, really help them. And, you know, they're at a much earlier stage than we are. And I think if someone had spoke to me about ADHD when I was a child, how my life might have, you know, gone slightly differently, and I might have not had the the mental health struggles that I have had through the years. But the celebrating neurodiversity is going to help you. And it's going to help them as well. I am out of time, and I've spoken way too long, so I apologise for that, Lynn. But yeah, I think these slides are getting sent out. There's just the positives again there. I think these slides are getting sent out. I really do hope that you've found it useful and that you found it interesting. Don't worry about that logo there. I sent Lynn the wrong slide initially. Just ignore that. That was from a conference I was at yesterday. But yeah, I do hope you found it useful. I know that some of the things I'm saying, being open about it, it's not going to work for everyone. I know that it can be difficult for some people, but I hope there's something that you can take away from that. And as I say, you've got my email address on the slides. Yes, I'll put my email address in the chat. I will. And if there's any questions or anything like that, please feel free to get in touch, and I'm more than happy to have a chat with you. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Arron. I just recognise that so much, all of the things you've said, and I really am grateful for you sharing that. And we will keep hold of the questions for you if anything comes up, and send them to you. I will be keeping in touch. So thank you so much from sharing your own personal experience, because it's not easy, is it? The masking thing is really interesting, because I think we do get so used to doing that and not being ourselves, that when we do, for me, it's like an euphoria. You're like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited, I can actually be myself. And that's really interesting, isn't it? That I can recognize your excitement.